What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Daily Bible Reading Snapshot. Today we're looking at the end of the book of Daniel, chapters 11 and 12. And there's so much prophecy contained here that we're just going to scratch the surface. I'm just going to try to go over the high points, but you can see more. If you want to read more about this, I suggest find a study Bible. Maybe the MacArthur Study Bible might be the best one on this section right here. So Daniel chapter 11, it says we are continuing to talk about what Daniel has already seen and the interpretations and the things that these angels are telling Daniel about. So first of all, it says that there will be 3 more kings in Persia after Darius. So one of them, the last one, is going to be very rich. And it says that he'll stir up against himself the kingdom of Greece. I think we're talking about the guy named Xerxes, who historically very rich and also fought against the Greeks. You might know him from the battle against the Spartans, right? I think that's the same Xerxes we're talking about here. And it says that he's going to have a great dominion. He's going to do basically all that he wants. There's going to be this kingdom, mighty kingdom that takes over, and then he's going to come. There's going to be this mighty king. Where does he come from? Well, it comes from the west, comes from Greece. He's going to take over, and he will divide this kingdom after he's gone to the 4 winds of heaven, not to his posterity. That means his children, not according to the authority which he ruled, for his kingdom shall be plucked up and shall go to others besides these. So who are we talking about? Well, that important figure in history, Alexander the Great, who comes, wipes out everybody. He basically is the ruler of the whole world and dies at about the age 33. So this guy lived a short life, but did amazing things, but it's not sent to his posterity, doesn't have kids, doesn't give the kingdom to his kids. It's given to his generals, to 4 generals in particular. And those generals take their stuff and they go their own way and they take their own kingdoms. But obviously, being the dominion takers that they are, they want to have more land and more kingdom. So it says the king of the north and the king of the south, they make an alliance and they fight and all this stuff. And there's a daughter given in marriage, and then the marriage falls through and it doesn't happen. You can read all this stuff. But the amazing, interesting thing is all of this played out in history. So the king of the north and king of the south, 2 important figures here. The kingdom in the north, I think we're talking about the Seleucid kingdom, which reigned in around the area of Syria, Damascus, all that area above Israel. And then the Ptolemaic kingdom down in the south, that's Egypt. These people were always fighting. So what you're going to see is a description of them going back and forth and fighting, and there's going to be an alliance, and then it's going to break, and lots of rulers, and all this stuff is described. And there's the war that's described, specifically the one with that guy, Antiochus Epiphanes, who's going to try to destroy the sanctuary of God, who will make it desolate. He'll have destruction in his hand, stand in the glorious land, verse 16. All this goes on, which is just amazing that as you're going to read this, you're like, all this happened? Yes, all of this happened. But I think we're going to have a shift that we see in verse 36 that's going to go towards the future. We've got this guy, Antiochus Epiphanes, and he's being described. But I think then we have a little bit of a shift here. We'll start looking towards the future, talking about a future king that's like Antiochus Epiphanes, who's going to speak against God, who's going to do all these things. He won't pay attention to the God of his fathers. He won't be like that. He's going to mistreat people, do all this terrible stuff. He'll come into the glorious land, and he'll fight against God's people. But it says God's going to do something about this. Very interesting. I think we're talking about that future figure. That's that Antichrist figure. We're probably talking about him here at the end of chapter 11. But then, chapter 12, it says, at that time shall arise Michael, the great prince, who has charge over the people. And there should be a time of trouble, such as there has never been since there was a nation till that time on these Israelites. But at that time, your people shall be delivered, and everyone whose name is found written in the book. This is like book of Revelation language, right? The name in the book of life. That's what's described here. And many of those who are asleep in the dust shall awake. So people who are dead and in the ground, they're going to come back to life. Interesting. Some to everlasting life and others to everlasting contempt. Kind of sounds like what's being described in Revelation 20, where the souls of the dead, right? People who have died, there's this regathering with their bodies. Those who go in one line are the people who go to the great white throne judgment in Revelation 20. That's the people who are going to everlasting contempt, and some to everlasting life. So some people, and I've heard this a lot, maybe you've heard this, that the Old Testament does not talk about heaven or hell. The Old Testament does not talk about the afterlife or about judgment. That's all New Testament stuff that was just added later. That's completely untrue for many reasons, but this is one of them. That Daniel's very clear that some will rise to everlasting life and others to everlasting contempt. That is exactly the theology we get from John the Apostle in the book of Revelation, that in the last days, at the very end, God is going to raise everyone back to life. Everyone's going to get a new body. Some are going to go to everlasting contempt, the place called the lake of fire, and others are going to go to everlasting life to live with God in the New Jerusalem. It says, and further, verse 3, the ones who go to everlasting life, they'll shine like the stars above in all their brightness in the sky above. And those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. But you, Daniel, shut up these words, seal them in the book until the time of the end. Many shall run to and fro, and knowledge shall increase. And then says, Daniel, I looked, and behold, there was people standing on the bank of the stream here, and we see another vision, and there's this question, how long is it going to be? How long is it going to be till all this takes place? You gave me so much prophecy, which again, if you're in Daniel's mind, you don't know what this is you don't know how it's going to play out. It just looks like a bunch of cryptic things about the future. But historically, we already looked back and we saw, wow, God made very specific promises that he keeps very specifically. But then there's this question, how long? And he says at the end, it's going to be a time, times, and half a time. 3.5 times, probably 3.5 years. Why do we say that? Well, because it says something about 129 days, or 1,290 days. What is that talking about? Well, 3.5 years. So at the end of this terrible time of tribulation, a time like there has never been since before the world was created, on this nation of Israel, there'll be a terrible time. And then it gets even worse for 3.5 years. Then at the end, God's going to do something about it. I think all this fits very well with what the book of Revelation talks about with the future. Obviously, I think it fits well because it's God's message to all of us about the end of the world. Now, how important is the end of the world? It's pretty important for you to know where you stand with God, although you might not live in this time period, as Daniel didn't get to experience this. And again, this is not something that you want to experience, especially when he says this is the worst, most troubling time that there ever has been since there was a nation of Israel. But certainly, God is going to keep these promises. Now, that's what I want you to see with the book of Daniel. God makes promises, God keeps promises, and he's able to do that because he's already proved it by being sovereign over the nations, over Nebuchadnezzar, over Belshazzar, over Cyrus, over Darius, over all these people. God is the Lord, and he will accomplish everything that he purposes. And anything that he says, we would be foolish to doubt. Anything that God promises. For us to say, oh, I don't think God can do that, we are being very, very, very foolish to do that. So never doubt what God says in his word, because he'll prove you and me wrong if we ever do. So that's the book of Daniel. Now we're looking at a short little book here, the book of 3 John. Again, this is John writing to a church, specifically to a church member, a guy named Gaius. He says, whom I love in truth. So this is a Christian guy. He says, I'm praying for you that you would have good health and it would go well with your soul. Interesting. He's like, 2 things to pray for. Again, for people, this is helpful for us as we pray for others. What do we want to pray for? Well, obvious to pray for their health, right? But also that they'd be spiritually healthy. Interesting that John prays for that right at the beginning. He says, I have no greater joy than to hear that my children are walking in the truth. That's so exciting to me to see that the people I discipled are continuing to walk in the truth. He says, I'm writing to you. I want you to walk in a manner worthy of God. There are people who've gone out for the sake of the name, accepting nothing from Gentiles. Therefore, we ought to support people like this. If you thought 2 John was mean because John said don't support certain people, 3 John is, no, we got missionaries who are out there. Support them. Give them the help that they need. They need to help to share the gospel. They need a place to stay. They need money for food. Help those people because they're doing the work of God. Then he says, but there are some who oppose the work that God's doing. A guy like Diotrephes. Diotrephes, it says, always wanted to put himself first. And in doing so, he rejected the authority of others in the church, which again, that's a helpful reminder for you. Am I a person like Diotrephes? Well, ask yourself the question, do you oppose the authorities, the spiritual authorities that you have at church? Or if you're always going against what they say, well, then you might be like Diotrephes, wanting to put yourself first instead of submitting to the leadership that God has given in your life. He says, don't be like him. He refuses to welcome the brothers and also puts a stop to those who want to. And he puts them out of the church. So this guy is powerful. And he's putting people out of the church who are welcoming missionaries. Again, totally upside down and totally backwards. So he says, look, don't imitate evil, imitate good. Look to Christ as the example. And he says, Demetrius, he received a good testimony from everyone and from the truth itself. We also add our testimony. We know your testimony is true. Basically saying Demetrius is a good guy. He knows what's going on. He says, I have much to write to you. I want to talk to you face to face, though. I want to see you face to face. He says, peace be with you, and greet the friends, each of them by name. Very interesting. There's a very intentional love that John has for these people. So there's so much we can learn from 3 John. One is obviously we want to support the people who are doing ministry work. We also don't want to be like Diotrephes, putting ourselves first and opposing the work that God's doing. And also know that we want to be intentional about our love for others. We see John display that with Gaius, praying for his spiritual health and his physical health. We also see that here at the end where he says, greet them all by name. I love all of them individually, not just as a group. I care about them as individual people before God. So much we can learn from the book of 3 John. Tiny book, but a lot here. Hopefully some things you can take away today and to put into practice today. So thanks for reading. We'll see you back tomorrow for another daily Bible reading snapshot.